Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the basis of rhetorical strategy. I'm going to give you an acronym called TRACE to initially analyze the rhetoric of a piece. So, first of all, we need to understand what do I mean when I say rhetoric, right? Chapter one talks about rhetorical strategy and how rhetoric is the art of argument. Rhetoric is basically the puzzle pieces of how we speak and how we convince people of other things. Hold on one second. Okay, so what is rhetoric is what we were talking about. So rhetoric is the way that we convince other people of things. So we talked about in a different lecture about argument how anything we say is pieced together with different messages. So, for example, if I ask my kids to do something, I might use bribery as a rhetorical strategy where I tell them, if you do this, then you will get this. Or perhaps I am talking to them about new protocols at school and I might use analogies. I know a lot of schools for masks are using analogies of superheroes and how superheroes wear masks because they care about other people and they're doing their job to protect the community. So those types of things are all what we consider rhetoric. Um, when we think about what's behind what's being said, that's what we mean when we say rhetoric. So, today I'm going to go over a simple strategy that you will be using to, um, it's the first step in analyzing rhetoric of speeches, of movies, of my lectures, whatever it is we're analyzing. This acronym is going to help you start your initial brainstorming for what does the rhetoric of this piece look like. And the acronym is called TRACE. Sorry, I don't know what to do with my coffee. I don't really have a space for it, so I'll put it right back there. Okay, so TRACE, we're going to start taking some notes. And so the first letter is T for text. So the first question is simple. What is the text? Is it a spoken speech? Is it a lecture? Is it a recorded documentary? Is it a persuasive piece? Is it an informational piece? Just the simple question of what is the text? And if we identify the text, then we can identify some of the details that go along with it. For example, if the text is a speech to elementary school kids, then we can automatically assume some things about the speech. For example, the word choice is going to be a little bit different than if we were looking at something for adults. Okay. For R, remember we're doing the acronym TRACE. The R is reader. Reader means audience. So who's the audience? In the example I gave earlier about speaking to my children, audience is a huge piece of that, right? I need to speak to my children like they're children, but also about, I'm giving them adult information in a way that I translate to children. Like I was talking about with the masks. We have a very adult situation, a pandemic happening, but I need to communicate that to my kids. So I have to balance my rhetoric. I have to balance speaking about an adult topic with the fact that my audience is an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. Okay, let's look at my other notes here. The other thing that's important to keep in mind about audience is, why is that the particular target? Why is that audience the target? Is it because we want to specifically sway the opinion of that audience? Is it because this message is required to be given to this audience? Is it because we want this audience to tell a different audience a certain message? Okay. So think about the target. Next is A, which stands for author. What do we know about the author? Are they an expert on the topic? Do they have a degree? Why are they giving this particular text? You could even do this for my lecture today. I'm the author of the lecture, and my motivation is to give you guys your text for the week. But also, some details about me is that I'm a college professor. I have qualifications to be speaking to you, like an MA and a BSED. So those are things you'd want to think about with author. Like, why is this author giving this particular um, text? All right, the C. Now, the C and the E of trace, this is not from your textbook. Although your textbook talks about these aspects of the rhetorical situation, I've made this acronym for you guys to have a simple, accessible tool, an accessible strategy. So the next letter is C, and that is constraints. And if you think about the word constraints, we're thinking about limits. So if you're constrained, you're limited from doing something. Okay. So in constraints and rhetorical strategy, we're thinking about any limits to the argument, any biases that might constrict the argument. So, for example, a constraint when I'm speaking to my kids about a pandemic is that they're kids. Okay. So some of these things are very interwoven and similar answers. For example, my audience, my readers are my kids, and some of the constraints are that they're kids. So when I'm thinking about my word choice, for example, that constrains how I can communicate a message. My audience's attention span constrains how I'm going to give my message, right? Like I can't plan an hour-long lecture or a recorded speech for my kids about wearing masks at school because that's super boring. That's why I'm better at speaking to you guys than speaking to my kids sometimes. So constraints are just anything that limit what the message is. So it could simply be a venue, right? Like if we're limited to online only, that's a constraint. If I'm limited with my audience age, that's a constraint. If I'm limited because I'm white and I'm speaking to an audience of mostly people of color, that's a constraint that I would need to consider and work with. Okay. So constraints can be something simple, but they can also be something a lot more philosophical, a lot more specific that I would need to really think about before engaging in the speech. And then the E is a fancy word that just means the cause to the argument. So exigence is actually the word. Okay. So exigence. Exigence. What is the cause of the rhetorical situation? So, in my kid example with the masks, the cause of that is number one, pandemic, but number two, and more importantly, is return to school, right? I have an urgent need to communicate a message because the kids are returning to school. So exigence is just a fancy rhetorical term for what's the cause of the rhetorical situation. Okay. Okay. Let's go over what this would look like for that Obama speech that you took notes on. Okay. Let me just erase my whiteboard. All right. So let's do the example of the Obama speech that some of us watched. Obama was giving a response to the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden. Okay. So, what was the text? It was a speech. It was being recorded. It was, I think, in the White House. Okay. It was a speech. It was an announcement. Okay. Simple. Who are the readers? Think about that. Who's going to watch this speech? Think about who's in the room when Obama gives this speech. It sounded like there were a lot of cameras going off. So we've got journalists, but the purpose of this speech is to be given to the American people and the global community. And then the immediate audience is the journalists. Author of the speech is something to think about. Do you think Obama wrote that speech that he gave? Perhaps he wrote it, right? But we know that there are a lot of people involved in political speeches. So technically, Obama is the author of the speech, right? But we also have staff writers. And we can assume that the staff writers are Democratic because Obama's a Democrat. So that's something else to keep in mind. Now, what are some limits of this particular rhetorical situation? Well, one limit is that we are Obama's giving this speech as an American president, so he has to be very careful with what he's saying. Everyone's watching and waiting to see how this announcement of Osama bin Laden's death is going to be conveyed. Um, Very political situation. So those are some of the constraints that might limit what Obama can and cannot say. He's an American leader, and this is a very political situation. And then the exigence is pretty simple. What's the cause of the speech? The capture and killing of Osama bin Laden, right? So that's it. Now we have an introductory rhetorical analysis where we're just looking at some of the very specific details of this rhetorical situation. So, in assignments, when I mention identifying the trace elements, this is what I'm talking about, where you just identify the type of text, the readers, the author, the constraints, and the exigence. And anytime you write a rhetorical analysis, you want to identify these things as a brainstorm for your introductory paragraph. So if I say write a rhetorical analysis on the Osama or on the Obama speech about Osama bin Laden, then your introduction is going to be introducing these elements. Okay. All right. That's Trace for today. Keep an eye out for other lectures that are posted related to this topic.